everyone, and welcome to Samantha Politics, a show where we talk about global politics and women's rights. We have a great show coming up.
On the military for the genocide against the Rohingya. So
as these poor people are being attacked, people are hiding in their offices. You guys saw a guest.
We're going to be talking about Burma and Russia today, but just a quick U.S. Native American Secretary of the Interior. Now, this is really monumental because
I'm Samantha Carlin, your host of Samantha Politics, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Samantha Politics, your source for global news. I'm your host, Samantha Carlin, and as usual, we have a great show for you lined up with some gentlemen, UK veterans that are on the ground right now in Lviv, Ukraine, evacuating refugees from very sensitive areas. And we also have another US military veteran that's going to help give us perspective on what to expect as Russia attacks the East and what Russia/Ukraine will have to do in order to win in a region that's far different from a landscape perspective than the center of Ukraine is. Now, before we get started on everything, I just want to tell you, if you like this show, make sure that you subscribe to us on Patreon. That helps us support production of this show. It's patreon.com/SamanthaPolitics1, and make sure to share this as it's streaming live. Also, this is a live broadcast if you are watching right now on YouTube or Facebook. That means you can ask questions during the show. So please feel free to do that, and we will direct those questions to our guests. That is the benefit of live stream. So go ahead and ask questions if you want to. So now let's get into the thick of things. Well, it is day 63 since Russia invaded Ukraine. It feels like it's been an eternity. What has happened since the last time we were together on this show, which was about 3 weeks ago? Well, the good news is that Russia did not take Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. They suffered a major defeat at Kiev. And that was a place that was really important for them to take because putting up the Russian flag in the capital is a way to proclaim victory versus any other city. So what have they done now? The Russians have taken most of their troops, the concentration of their troops, and pushed them to the east and to the south. Zach, if you could put that map up, if it's not up already. So you can see on this map the concentration of Russian troops, whereas in the past, it was kind of like this. It's now just concentrated on the east of the country and the southern part of the country. They're making limited military gains in the Luhansk and Donbass regions. Some are saying, though, that Russia has lost as much of its stockpile of weaponry in the Ukraine fight in 63 days as it lost in all of the time that they were in Afghanistan. That's pretty startling. And that's just the weaponry. We're not even talking about the thousands of Russian soldiers that have lost their lives. There's estimates that that Russian soldiers' casualties are in the tens of thousands, and obviously there have been thousands and thousands of casualties within Ukraine as well. This has just been a devastating war when it comes to the amount of senseless human life that's been taken, both on the military side and on the civilian side. Kherson was the first city to fall to Russia. However, Russia's desire to move past Kherson is being met with fierce fighting from the Ukrainians. So they haven't really been able to spread out that win beyond Kherson. Another area that's pretty interesting, Zach, if you could pull up that second map that might be coming into the fold in this fight, is a breakaway region that is to the east of Moldova, and it's on the western part of Ukraine. You can see that it's called Transnistria. Now, I frankly am going to be really honest. I didn't even know that this region existed until not that long ago. It's a breakaway region that is has a lot of ethnic, quote unquote, whatever that means, Russians within the region. It is self-governed, but it's still technically part of Moldova. So there have been reports that there were 2 missiles that hit radio stations within Transnistria. And obviously the idea is that they're Russian. Interestingly, the Russians are putting out, looks like it's the Russians, they're putting out memos to civilians in Transnistria saying that it's the Ukrainian army and that they should evacuate or they will be eliminated. Looks pretty suspect, doesn't look like something Ukraine would do, but civilians are getting those messages now on the ground in Transnistria and hoping that the war doesn't go that way. In terms of the possibility, we'll talk about that. My perspective is that it's not a NATO member state. And so there's not as much risk as it would be to go into a NATO member state because Article 5 isn't invoked, which would make all NATO member states have to act on behalf of a country, for example, like Poland, which is a NATO country. Zelensky is saying that Russia's war against Ukraine is just the beginning and that he absolutely has intention to move beyond Russia, or excuse me, to move beyond Ukraine and even in Transnistria. Other things that have happened that have been really, really horrifying. Last time our guest worked on international human rights law and international law, and we talked about war crimes and is Russia committing war crimes? Well, when the Russians retreated from Bucha, there were the most horrible things found just ever in terms of civilian deaths and civilian murders. These are not casualties. This is outright murder. We're talking about civilians shot execution style in the back of the head with their arms behind their back. Some are even using the term genocide to describe this. Other pictures that I don't want to show here because they are just that horrifying are people that have been drowned in wells or shot and then put in wells to also try to ruin the water supply. So you see, killing and then ruining the water supply. And I think it's become extremely clear that Russia is 1,000 bazillion percent culpable of war crimes and of intentionally targeting civilians, both execution style and within Mariupol, trying to starve them out. It is estimated that at least 10,000 civilians have died in Mariupol. Staggering numbers we're looking at. And the area is still not at a ceasefire. Supposedly it's at a ceasefire, but there's still reports of fighting. There's still reports of bombing. They're still not really letting people out. So it's unclear what exactly is going on in Mariupol. And breaking news as of today, April 27th, is that Russia has cut off its gas supplies to both Bulgaria and Poland. Now, since the invasion, this is the first time that Russia has cut off gas supplies to EU countries. It's not completely clear why Poland and Bulgaria, but what do we think? Well, Poland has been accepting refugees and taking literally millions of refugees into Poland and has expressed support for the sanctions against Russia. They've also helped from a military perspective. Oh, this is the funny part about this, that they claim that the oil and gas companies claim that they cut off because these countries would not pay in rubles. This is the Russian strategy. The Russian strategy is to discredit, deny, devalue, and distract. This is typical Russian stuff of let's make up another story about why we're cutting off oil and gas that has nothing to do with the war. Clearly, it has to do with the war. Bulgaria recently condoned the invasion of Ukraine and also voted to support EU sanctions against Ukraine. So that could be a reason for Bulgaria. Bulgaria hasn't, though, provided military weapons, only humanitarian aid. So what we're worried about here is, Bulgaria has relied on Russia for its gas. 90% of its gas comes from Russia. That's big. Poland, it's about 40%. Poland looks like it's better situated because they're having the construction of a Norwegian pipeline into Poland later this year, and they only get 40% of gas. But Bulgaria, not clear what's going to happen. It's looking like other places that they might turn for gas might be Qatar, Algeria, and Nigeria. In terms of the UK, they only make up about 5% of the UK supply. However, cutting gas supplies could shake up the world's energy prices even more and make cost of living higher. Ursula von der Leyen, who is the European Commission chief, is calling Russia's decision to stop these gas pipelines an act of blackmail, and she refers to it as unjustified and unacceptable, and I would have to be in agreement with her. Supposedly, there are contingency plans for if this were to happen. I'm sure that they have been thinking about this as a possibility the entire way through. There's also been mystery fires at sensitive facilities in various strategic locations in Russia. This is also unclear, could have been caused by an air or missile strike. We've also had the US get further involved. The United States has sent our highest so far people to Ukraine. So Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and also Secretary of State Anthony Blinken both went over to Ukraine in an expression of support and to see how we could further help Zelensky and help the Ukrainians in this fight against Russia. So the US did decide to send another $800 million in military aid to Ukraine. In terms of the number of refugees we're looking at, and we're going to talk about that with Ryland, who's waiting in the wings, we're seeing about almost 5.3 million refugees have left Ukraine. An estimated 7.7 million have been displaced within the country by April 21st. Again, those are vague numbers, but if we think about our first show on Ukraine, right when Putin invaded, it was 1 million, and now 63 days later, we're at 12 million that are internally displaced and have left the country. Other big news on this is there's reports of US sharing valuable intelligence with Ukraine about where the Russian troops are located and where they're going to strike so that Ukrainians could clear the area. There's this big hullabaloo about this, but in my perspective, intelligence sharing between allied countries is not new. This is just, I think, trying to be overblown by Russia in a way of saying that the U.S. is attacking and it's all the U.S.'s fault. Another fun story, well, I don't know if the rest of them were fun, but a fun story that I like, I always talk about how in feminist leadership, I call it start where you stand, meaning you don't have to have the US government behind you or, the European Commission behind you to make a difference, which is exactly what we're going to hear from Ryland, co-founder of Project Apollo. So some hackers within Belarus breached computers that controlled the country's trains and brought some of them to a halt to disrupt Russian soldiers moving into Ukraine. I love this. They call themselves the cyber partisans, very sophisticated and kind of like, we're on the cyber attack. So they were switching devices and using encrypted data to basically render trains inoperable that were taking Russian military equipment, which I just think is kind of hilarious. So the other thing that has happened within this war, and if you'll notice, the name of the show is UK Veterans Join the Fight, is that veterans have been coming from all over the world to help Ukraine. Now, I want to be completely upfront that these are voluntary decisions. So this is not the US sending in its troops, the UK sending in its troops. Our countries have been very hesitant to do that because of the possibility of further conflagrating this with Russia and turning this into a world war. But there are incredibly brave people from the US, from the UK, from lots and lots and lots of countries that have gone over there to join in the fight against Russia. Chechens, I believe, since Russia leveled Grozny, and Chechens hate the Russians. So, Zach, if you could bring up this text message from one of my friends of friends. So in this text message, you can basically see how this US soldier went over there voluntarily to help in the fight against Ukraine. And I love how he says, my friend says, well, what are you doing over there? He's like, javelin thrower, car thief. I don't remember what else it says, but, head of this command. And he just went over and was like, I'm here, let's go. And so this is an exclusive text message and exclusive photos from on the ground in Ukraine of US soldiers. Again, not officially sanctioned by the US. I want to make that extremely clear to dispel Russian propaganda, but there are some very brave people going over there. All right, so now after this introduction, hopefully I've gotten you up to speed on what's going on in Ukraine now. I'm really excited to bring in a military veteran from the United Kingdom, not just for his accent, which I happen to love, but for his unbelievable bravery, who went over to Ukraine to offer his assistance, and him and a friend have now started their own initiative called Project Apollo, to rescue vulnerable refugees from Ukraine and to get them out to Poland. So our guest, Rylan Harding, co-founder of Project Apollo, served for 18 years in the British Army. Rylan, you don't look that old. And he was a specialist in physical digital security and comms. He was a member of Special Forces operations, undertaking a wide range of complex and interesting theaters, which in English means he's fought all over the world. He's a leader who has led and trained security and communication capabilities for UK interests overseas, from large strategic deployments down to small man tactical operations. So without further ado, I would love to bring in our first guest, Rylan Harding.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm so delighted you're here. And I also want to thank you for coming in at 2 a.m. your time.
Yeah, plenty of coffee.
So I'm glad they still have that at East in Ukraine. So, without disclosing too much, because obviously your safety is paramount, but can you let us know what region of Ukraine, where exactly are you right now?
Yeah, so I'm in the western city of Lviv. It's quite secure tonight. No sirens or anything. So that's my location in general.
And what are you seeing there?
So we're still seeing a lot of people coming from the east, moving into Lviv. Lviv still carries on as normal that you would see from the outside world, just with the odd air raid siren and the cruise missile.
I love how that's normal. It's normal, except for the odd air raid siren and cruise missile, like just a plane passing overhead. And so, can you explain to us what exactly is Project Apollo, and how did you end up in Ukraine in the first place? Let's start there.
So I left the military about a year ago, and when Russia invaded, I just felt compelled to go over and use my skill set to try and do some good. I sold my car to finance myself to come over here, and that's where I met up with Ben, the other co-founder, and we started planning to evacuate vulnerable people from Ukraine, but all the way to safety in Krakow in Poland. Because there was reports of human trafficking at the borders. So my team then grew. I got 2 more British veterans, and we met up with a US citizen called Hank Holland, who helped us get set up as well. So that was our main function. It was just a group of people, and now we formalized it into Project Apollo. So we're a thing, and we're just solely working off donations and trying to be as strategic as we can, and small team and big effect. That's sort of our motto.
So how are you deciding? Well, first of all, that's amazing that you were like, I'm going to sell my car, and instead of going to Yacht Week in Croatia, like most people in America would probably do, you're going to, to help people. I mean, what about you felt compelled? Like, what was it that spoke to you and was like, I need to go do this?
I just, with all the training that I've had, that I thought I can deliver real good and help people in the bigger terms. There's plenty of people that have just gone over there to fight and just being one man. But I thought if I can empower and use some sort of command and control, we can do more with less.
Was the plan the whole time to extract refugees, or what was the plan when you got?
Yeah, so we've extracted evacuees, but we've also punched above our weight in delivering humanitarian aid. We've delivered like over 30 tons to the people that need it, not just to warehouses on the border. We've taken Arctic lorries all the way to the front where people actually have the food there and then. because there's still tons and tons of aid just sat at warehouses where there's nobody able to deliver them to the front.
So are you actually physically taking the money that's donated, buying supplies, and I'm not sure what a lorry is.
In the States, a big truck, an Arctic truck.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So we use the donations mainly to finance 4x4s and fuel, and a lot of people donate in the UK. So the humanitarian aid that's donated, we don't use the donations to buy that. It's already donated, if I've explained that right.
But you're literally going in these trucks, or you're funding the trucks to then go and deliver it to people?
So the trucks were coming from the UK, and originally they were just getting dropped off at the border, and they would lay in wait there for 8 days to 2 weeks. So we started escorting the lorries or the trucks all the way.
Are trucks from the UK government?
They're just from companies in the UK that have donated, sanitary products, tents, shelters, that kind of thing.
But they were just essentially sitting there on the border. So they donated it, but they didn't create the supply chain to actually get it into the country. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's right. And even now, there's just humanitarian aid just sat at warehouses where there's nobody in country or an organization putting things to the front. It's just all sat there.
So you're physically. I'm just trying to like get the frame. So you show up in, where did you fly into?
So flew into Krakow.
Okay, so you flew into Krakow, you drove to the border, and then we're like, what can I do? Or can you just explain a little bit more how this whole thing works?
So it took us a week to sort of get some ground truth of how can we best use like I said, use our skill set and start delivering some good effect, not just delivering clothes that people don't need. And, we wanted to be targeted in what we'd done. So that from there, we started making connections with British lorry truck drivers coming across, and they didn't want to leave it at the border. They wanted to take it to the people that need it. So I was like, my team can enable this. So that's when we started escorting trucks in, and then using the church network, we were getting vulnerable people all the way across the border, away from the human traffickers, and into secure accommodation in Krakow.
Wow. So you're basically, when you say my team can escort them in, what does that mean to escort? Is it
originally we started escorting aid into Lviv and disseminating it to like church missions there, and then we've started moving further east, but in smaller teams than taking large trucks, because it can be a bit, the roads are difficult, and the driving in Ukraine can be a bit wild too.
I know if it's Eastern Europe in general, but I lived in the Balkans in Bosnia, and like, oh my gosh, driving there is, people just drive there smoking a cigarette in one hand and texting in the other. It's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Roads are ridiculous.
I say to my team, a road traffic accident is just as dangerous as enemy fire over there.
This is so true. This is so true.
Yeah.
So, okay, so escorting humanitarian, what are you hearing from people, these refugees that are coming into Lviv?
So I've seen a noticeable change over the past week that many of them think that the surrounding countries are full. So a lot of them are wanting to stay within country and be displaced internally. But we're trying to get the message out, that there's still accommodation, there's still scope to get jobs, but it's a hard sell with more and more people just wanting to stay within country. And at the borders as well, I've noticed that there's a lot of people returning into Ukraine, which is what I've seen this week. And I think that's down to the Russians pulling out of Kiev. So all those residents that were in Kiev are now returning because of the lack of jobs.
Do you think it's safe for them to return?
I think they're gambling, but I understand that they've been in hotels. They missed their male counterparts, so I totally understand their reasons for going back.
So meaning it's a gamble because Putin could decide any day to go west again.
Yeah, and his advances in the east could become a lot quicker. we just don't know. I can't see the Russians giving up lightly, so it's here for a long haul.
Yeah. So tell me about the human trafficking situation at the border. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so the humanitarian centres where originally refugees were getting dropped off at, all across the Polish borders, there was criminal gangs taking kids and women away for the sex trafficking. And the way that originally, when the humanitarian centres were set up, people's goodwill were offering themselves to take families away. And there was no sort of recording originally of who's taking what person where, and drivers could just turn up, register with fake details, and just take a family away.
Oh wow! So meanings they could show. So somebody could show up at the border and say, "Oh, I'm taking them to my house," and it's actually traffickers.
Yeah, who wants to go to Reservoir? And people put their hands up, and in they go, and off they're gone. You'll never see them again.
It's so sick to think that there are people out there who would exploit the situations of vulnerable refugees to make money. I mean, it's literally, those people are evil. It's like so evil. I can't even. It gives me the chills.
Vultures preying on the vulnerable. Yeah.
Oh my! It's sick. It's sick. So since then, what's happened in terms of trying to ameliorate the human trafficking?
So a lot of it is education and the coordination with the smaller NGOs of getting them from the west of Ukraine all the way into secure accommodation, whether that be through the church, through missions, through Airbnb have donated lots of tokens, and really getting them away from that sort of danger zone of the border, and just because people are desperate, just going, oh, who's going here? And I'll just jump in any car.
So how do people tell? I mean, because we had on this show a couple weeks ago, or I don't know, at the beginning of the conflict, a guy whose sister-in-law has set up legitimate housing in her home and has gone to the border and just said, get in the car, and is actually doing good. Like, how do you tell between the vultures and or is there no way?
That is a very tricky part, and I always say to somebody, have a plan and move to somewhere that you know, or you know of somebody, so there's some sort of trace of where you're going, and you've got some sort of contact or friend that you can be sort of nearby. And a lot of it is reputation as well, building up a reputation and making people aware that you are the good guys and not the bad.
So tell me about, so you're taking people now from where to where?
So we've taken people from the west of Ukraine all the way to secure accommodation in Krakow, which was funded by the Baptist Church. And we can check up on them at any time, and we're highly confident that they're getting looked after. And then there's people going from that secure accommodation to Spain, to the UK. But that's all done by the church, not by us. We just do the operational side of the moving. And then internally, we've moved people from the Donbass region into Lviv, because we can't force people to leave country, and that, we've got them to safety and they wanted to stay in Lviv, and at least they're out of harm's way for now.
Can you tell me about some of the obstacles or some of the kind of more frightening moments that you've had in this journey? And then also I'd love to hear after about some of the beautiful moments. But let's start.
The cruise missiles, we've had cruise missiles in Lviv, for instance, drop 350 meters away from the church mission I was at one night. And then going more towards the east, you've got the threat of FSB agents, even criminal gangs setting up VCPs. And then you've got, the closer you get to the front line, obviously being in range of heavy artillery. But local knowledge is key, and there's still plenty of local people wanting to help and use their cars. And it's trying to coordinate those people not to do things randomly, and work together and sort of be stronger together as a team.
So you're helping to almost to coordinate these people who are really
so there's so many drivers that are just offering help from the front line and bringing people west, that we try and enable the locals and coordinate the locals to spread them out and not all be in one area, and have more effect that way. So that I use the term like a force multiplier. So we're using the locals to do more effectively.
How do you, I mean, you were in the military for 18 years, so you probably, I mean, how do you deal with the fear? And then how do you deal with refugees who I'm sure are also
Yeah, I mean, you haven't got the warm, fluffy blanket of the UK military or the US military overhead with aircrafts, or if you're in trouble, that will come and pull you out. But it's making good connections and not taking too much risk, being sensible.
It's funny. It's like looking at you, you're like, nope, just being sensible, not taking risks. It's fine. I do not fear. So can you tell me about some of the beautiful moments that you've had? I mean, we saw that beautiful slideshow that you and Ben gave us of these people that are just seem so grateful, but can you tell us the beautiful moments?
Yeah, I mean, having spent 18 years in the military, I've become a right softie the past couple of weeks. The joy on the faces when you drop them off and they just can't stop hugging you when you get them to Krakow, just makes it all worthwhile.
And so, how are you picking who you're taking out?
We use the church network to the best of our advantage, because the church in Ukraine is, heavily organized. There's a big network. So we just speak to a couple of bishops and, just say, we're planning on doing this move. Who have you got? And do it that way. We don't really just select people off the street. We try and target the most vulnerable through what the locals are saying.
And you also, there was an article about how you were evacuating a Jewish area, and that Jewish area was particularly at risk. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So that it was just because of the religious minorities, just in any country, that when a war was happening, they weren't getting as much support. So we offered our help. We're agnostic in what we do. Project Apollo, no religion, race, or creed. We'll help whoever needs it. So we just provided our support to them, and done as much as we could.
So yeah, it's still shocking to me. It's like that some of these people lived through the Holocaust, and now they're like, oh my God, not again. It's like, what? There was also
packing up suitcases.
Yeah, there was also some research, or at the beginning of the war, that some of the only people that got out were the Jews, because they're like, oh, not making this mistake again, thinking this isn't going to happen, which is horrible. Like, oh well, our entire people were murdered, so now we know. I mean, it's just.
I've definitely seen the slowdown at the border, as in people leaving from 2 months when I first got here, but a lot of them are just being internally displaced now, and there's nobody with jobs. The kids aren't getting education, which is something that we're looking at. That all the lessons from COVID, translating them over into Ukrainian, so the kids can get some sort of education online.
So meaning all the schools are closed and they're still basically just living at home, or what?
Well, I'm not sure about all the schools, but from what I've seen in the places I've gone, it's just children just there day in, day out on their smartphones, because the signal's still working in the west of Ukraine, playing games, whereas I want to try and get them some sort of education by using the things that were made in COVID, especially in the UK. I know there's so many educational lessons that were made from COVID. I want to try and get them translated over and some sort of portal on the website or something that they can access.
I love that idea. Were there not Ukrainian COVID lessons in that school?
Yeah, this is literally, I thought of this a couple of days ago, so I'm investigating it. There's loads of people that have reached out to me, doing support. So hopefully Russian and Ukrainian speaking lessons, interactive, for all ages, really.
Great. So given what you've seen on the ground in some of the disconnects with humanitarian aid, as the US and the UN and the UK and all these countries pledge billions of dollars in humanitarian aid, what kind of improvements would you recommend for how that aid is being delivered?
The UN and the Red Cross, they have big power, but they're so cumbersome and slow to react. it seems the small NGOs are initially doing all the legwork and trying to push all this aid out, but we're small and we're agile, and there's only so much we can do. But the UN and the Red Cross, they are around, and they are pushing out the aid. It's like I said, it's just getting it from that border to the front.
So maybe in terms of improvements that they could make is taking some of the resources, not just for aid, but for the supply chain coordination of drivers to get things into the areas that need them.
Yeah, especially when you've got all those locals who want to help, then some sort of way of enabling them to do the work themselves, because they want to help their own country. So use them as an asset.
I'm recalling a conversation I had years ago with a woman who was working in Lesbos after the obviously when the Syrian refugee crisis was at its peak.
Yep.
And she created some sort of app that was kind of like Uber for humanitarian aid, but it would be like somebody in, wherever it was could be like, we need diapers and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And then like the request would be sent to the volunteer driver who was given access to the warehouse or whatever it was. And then they would go deliver it.
Yeah. We were working on some technology as well to hopefully enable the same sort of thing that you just said, and I'm sure there's other people doing that as well.
Yeah, it's so amazing. What else do we need to be kind of worried about or aware of when it comes to vulnerable populations? We talked about human trafficking. What else is going on that we should be aware of in terms of IDPs and refugees?
So Poland's got a lot of refugees within it, especially in Krakow. It's just providing that continued support, especially clinical trauma, psychological support, and jobs. I think that's why I said earlier, a lot of people are going back because they're fed up of hotels and not having any money, and they think they need to go back to Ukraine and to find work to support themselves.
So jobs could even be remote jobs, or
I mean, in Krakow, there's lots of Ukrainian girls working in the bars and the cafes, but there's only so many cafes, especially when Poland's had millions worth of refugees.
Is Krakow seeing a much bigger, much more refugees than Warsaw, since it's closer? It's a lot closer. And you walk around Krakow and you can it's just all women pushing kids. Wow.
There's loads of them. Yeah, bless them.
Have you had any experiences working at all or coordinating with the Ukrainian military?
No, we've been pretty much just working with the civilians. The Ukrainian military have all been supportive when we've gone through checkpoints, and they're happy. They push us through. They've been really good.
Can you tell us any specific stories of any of the refugees you've helped in terms of like their situation and who they are, and maybe without naming names, and where they are now?
Yeah, so we've mainly helped people from the Donbass region, and some are in Germany. It's heartbreaking to see when we've had to take a woman and child over to Krakow, she's now in Spain, but obviously the father had to stay behind, and just watching that, watch us take their wife and child away. But I assured him that I would take good care of them, so that was heartbreaking. But it's nice to see we get videos back of them in Spain now, all settled, so that's good.
Where in Spain are they?
They're in Madrid.
Oh, they went to Madrid.
Yeah.
So are these cities all providing resources for them to be able to, accommodations, like? Yeah,
within the UK, there's a scheme where families can sponsor Ukrainian families coming over and house them and look after them and help them and get them settled in.
What else do you want people to know? Or what do you think it's important? It's mostly a Western audience watching the show. What do you think it's important to impart upon the people that are watching tonight?
I think the the knowledge of the border of the human trafficking, and be safe in numbers, and get a plan, and sort of let people know what route you're doing and where you're going, so you don't get lost in the wind. And I do think that there is a change now, like I said, of there's so many people left the country, but then they've left and they've got nothing to do or nowhere to stay long term, so they're now sort of starting to come back, which is my sort of gut instinct. That's what's happening, because at the border there was like 2 miles of cars going into Ukraine from Poland.
Wow. So
Yeah.
they're just desperate to get back to some sense of normalcy.
But it may be just because the Russians have pulled out of Kiev, then the people from that region have gone, oh, okay, then they've gone, so I'll go back.
So you're in Lviv, but you said you just got out people from Donbass. So were you driving all the way east to pick people up?
Yeah, 2 days it takes.
Wow, to get from Lviv to Donbass.
Yeah, and then back.
What change have you seen from considering the Russians have now, they're focusing on Donbass and Luhansk? What change have you seen in terms of Russian attack into that region, or have you?
So without going into too much detail of how we do it, it's I wouldn't put my team in that close a risk. So we get sort of in the vicinity of, and then like I said, we enable drivers and give drivers money for petrol or diesel, and we sort of bring them back to a central hub.
Wow. And these are mostly just volunteer drivers.
Yeah. They are salt turf, yeah.
Unbelievable. So how can people help that are watching tonight?
I guess so. I don't want to talk about money, but donations help fund us. We're all volunteers, and it costs enormous amount in fuel and vehicles, and just aid as well. Not just nobody wants clothes, but people want things like washing powder, dry food, all the things that you wouldn't think about is what they need.
So Rylan, just because some people might listen to this as well, what's the website where they can donate?
Yeah, so we're projectapollo.org.uk, and then you can see up-to-date pictures on what we're up to there.
And if people wanted to donate like dry goods, like soap or whatever that is, would they just donate the money for you to purchase it there, or how does that work?
There's an info email on there, so just reach out to us and we'll be able to coordinate something from there. Or if you want to donate for something specific, then you can donate, but with a tag on there saying this is for this, and we're more than happy to do that.
Great. Anything else that you want to share with us before I let you go to sleep?
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
I just want to, thank you so much, Rylan. I think that a lot of people can feel powerless in the face of war, and the fact that you and Ben and these other people have just stepped up and said, you know what, I got 18 years of experience. I'm really smart. I can help. And that using your own capital and have just gone over there to help. I mean, I'm incredibly inspired by you.
Thank you.
And, I wish you the best of luck. And, I hope that people here will consider donating, and also just to be inspired to realize that you don't have to feel powerless and that you can do something. One more question, Rylan. What about people, if there are people who are interested in coming to volunteer in Poland or Ukraine, is that something that they could do with you? I've seen that interest a lot in Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for instance, somebody without military background or a specific skill set, we could utilize you, especially between the Ukraine border and Krakow side, doing a lot of legwork that side. So you're nice and safe and not being a hindrance without me sounding arrogant.
And what kind of skills do you need when you say legwork? Do you need people to logistics,
driving? Yeah, driving mainly. Human resources as well. We get sat down with a lot of HR, trying to grow the project and look at visas for people and things like that. So that would be a great help as well.
Great. And Rylan, what is the email that people could contact you on if they are interested in volunteering?
Yeah, so info@projectapollo.org.uk.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rylan. It's been a pleasure. And, I'm so grateful to you for just what you're doing. It's really unbelievable.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Good night. Well, that was Rylan Harding. He is the co-founder of Project Apollo, which is, kind of a UK organization. Well, I don't even know if I'd call it UK, but it's gentlemen from the UK who have gone over there to help extract vulnerable refugees from Ukraine and get them settled safely and getting past that big hump of the border where there's an extreme risk of human trafficking, which obviously, especially when you're having women and girls who are not accompanied by men because they all stayed behind to fight, the risk is even higher, and elderly as well, for these people to be human trafficked, especially when they're vulnerable in these situations. And we need people with good hearts like that. So hopefully people will consider donating and even consider volunteering. Before we get to our next guest, I would also like to really thank the Ukraine NGO Coordination Network, who has generously sponsored this show. So we live in an age of disruption, and humanitarian aid and crisis response is no different. And as Rylan was saying, when Russia invaded Ukraine just a few weeks ago, governments and large NGOs, such as the Red Cross, found themselves struggling to respond in a way that's meaningful and rapid. So this is where another new network has been formed called the Ukraine NGO Coordination Network. And they've stepped in and they saw the heroic work that small organizations like Rylan was talking about were doing on the ground in Ukraine. And they've brought them into a team of teams together where they can share specialized skills, knowledge, and resources to help the victims of the Russian invasion. Some of the things that the Ukraine NGO Coordination Network are working on today are rescuing victims of sexual violence, disarming unexploded munitions and booby traps, that's terrifying, protecting displaced women and children from human trafficking, and evacuating vulnerable populations from contested areas. But as we were saying, people, especially in the US, the UK, they tend to donate to places like ICRC, Save the Children, which are great organizations. However, they're not as nimble as the local organizations that are able to rapidly deploy on the ground without all of the paperwork. So a lot of these organizations that are within this NGO coordination network are small. They don't have professional fundraising teams like the ICRC to go get money. So volunteers, resources, and donations from everyday people like you watching this show can keep this mission alive and save thousands of Ukrainians from horrible tragedies. If you want to support the Ukraine NGO coordination mission, we will put the link in the chat, but it is www.uncn.one. And that again is the Ukraine NGO Coordination Network. And you can support them on Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And we will put the link within the chat. So without further ado, I would like to bring in our next guest, Daryl Owens. Daryl is the Director of Government Affairs for America's Warrior Partnership. He is also an Army Reserve officer, so American patriot. Daryl recently returned from U.S. Europe, where he was the Assistant Foreign Policy Advisor and Congressional Liaison for the U.S. Army. So if there's anyone who knows this region well, it is Daryl. Prior to joining AWP, Daryl was a staffer in the United States Congress for nearly 14 years. And even though he was, advising a Republican, I still like him, but he was the National Security Advisor and military ledge assistant for Senator Pat Toomey, Republican from Pennsylvania, handling the senator's military, veterans, foreign affairs, homeland security, and intelligence issues portfolio. Daryl was born in northwestern Pennsylvania, and he went to AU. He's basically worked on Capitol Hill forever. I'm not going to go into all that. He is deployed to South Korea, Poland, and Germany, and is a 2012 graduate of the Air Force Air Command and Staff College, and a 2016 graduate of the U.S. Army War College, and he's a 2019 Marshall Memorial Fellow. I literally can't put in any more words about him. He also has a newborn baby, so I'm very grateful for him to coming on the show. Hi, Daryl. Welcome.
Hi, Samantha. Thank you for having me. And I have to tell you, it's great to be on your show finally. And I don't know if you've ever done your show here, having a 6-week-old child stare you down at the same time we're on the show. It's very unique. I can tell you that. It's like, oh, she's still staring right at me. Okay, this is fun.
Well, so, you know what? It is never too early to start teaching young children about global affairs.
Absolutely. Although I'll have to grow my library a bit bigger. Your library behind you is still significantly bigger than mine here, so I'll have to work on that.
You know what? It's just step by step, baby steps.
Exactly.
So, before we dive into any of the other questions, you've been watching this show so far. Any thoughts on what Ryland had to say so far?
No, it sounds like Apollo is doing great work over there. And I mean, I don't know how he gets his folks to go back and forth all the way across country, a 2-day trip. That's impressive. That's a long way to drive across an area that's not entirely secure, especially on some of those roadways. And to have him and his team doing that, it's impressive. It's doing yeoman's work. So hats off to them and their group, and I hope they keep doing the great work.
So, let's talk a little bit about territory. So the terrain and geography of the Donbass is dramatically different from Western Ukraine and Kiev. Can you give us a little bit of intel on what exactly we're thinking about in terms of geography?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. So when you look at the western part of Ukraine, you're looking at heavily forested areas that have a lot of river valleys, that have a lot of mountainous areas, and big cities. You've got Kyiv, you've got Kharkiv, and everything else. So you have to really be careful if you're an invading army not to get stuck in these narrow entrapment points. When you go further to the east, though, past the Dnipro River, you're looking at the Donbass, which is generally speaking much more flat, much more open ground. It goes into the highlands up there as you go into kind of the steppe into Russia and then into Mongolia further to the east. So it's much more open. That's open tank country. That's long distance. You can see people from a long ways away, and you're shooting long distance projectiles, which has kind of been the strength of the Russian military so far. Long range fires, lots of tanks, lots of armored columns movement, very few choke points. So it's interesting so far. The Ukraine has really put some of their best troops out there in the Donbass right now, and they've dug trenches. You think back World War I, they've got entrenchments there. They've got defense in depth. You've got
This
several.
is like the warfare of World War II almost, in terms of the long range and just the kind of open fields. Is that kind of what we're thinking, like those old war movies that we watch?
Absolutely. Much more ease of terrain to be able to go around. The problem is the Russian army has not shown so far their ability to precisely target a lot of the Ukrainian positions, so they've held out. And so that's why you're seeing Russia now try to do an encirclement because they can't break through the defensive lines that Ukraine has dug and that have held for basically the past 8 years.
Why?
It's basically what I mentioned a second ago. Their lack of precision fires, their targeting cycles aren't as fast or as precise as American fires. American fires, if you're looking at a long-range artillery shell, it's one shot, one kill. That they're looking to.
Is that because of the training that the U.S. military is just playing better than the Russian military? Well, we already know the answer to that is yes. Or is it that the weapon systems are better that the U.S. uses?
It's a mix of both, and training. So it's not just about putting the right people in the right place. It's about having them trained to the right way to be able to put together all their sensors together and hit that target precisely. And training and doctrines have logistics training to be able to have enough ammunition at the right point to be able to shoot long range and hit targets. The Russians have not been able to put all that together so far, and it's really cost them dearly.
So what about the training? I mean, we've heard some of these reports of kind of the Russian military of being like just not very good in terms of just not, beyond training, of just not motivated, not, I mean, I wonder, in your experience in Europe, I'm sure you came into contact with Russian troops. I'm wondering what your experience has been like, even in military exercises with Russia.
So mercifully, I have not come into contact with Russian troops. So that would be another different conversation I'm sure we'll be having about World War III right now. But we have had a chance to monitor them and track what they've been doing. And so you have to put it in this kind of perspective. For about a third of their military force right now overall is brand new conscripts. These are people who were 18, 19-year-old kids who were conscripted. They're not voluntary. These are people who are basically drafted off the streets and forced into military service for the course for about a year. And so they don't want to fight. Most of them have gone through very little training. They go through about 2 weeks of training and are put right out in the field to do a large-scale exercise in a tank that they've never really been in before in their lives. Now they're fighting for their lives someplace. So it's not good, not a morale boost or anything else. And you got about a third that is kind of they're contracted conscription, where you have conscription and they've basically signed on to stay a little bit longer. So you basically down to a third of a professional army, and a lot of those soldiers are the ones they put in tanks, and those are the ones the Russians have lost right away. So when they went into Kyiv and when they got their tanks blown up and they ran out of fuel and they ran out of the tracks on their tanks, they lost their professional force, and they lost a lot of their senior most veteran, battle hardened people that served in Syria and elsewhere, and that's had a massive toll on not only their army but their morale too.
So some of the most experienced people were in Kiev and were killed, you're saying, or?
Yeah, they always put the way the Russian doctrine works, they try to put their most experienced folks right up front to try to lead the charge, to show everyone else behind them to follow them in the battle. And when you start taking losses right off the bat, that's who goes first. So unfortunately,
that's opposed to the U.S., which kind of puts our officers in the back and puts our enlisted first.
Not necessarily. Actually, there's kind of a mix across the United States Army and how we do that. The doctrine is dramatically different, and even we're talking about tactics difference. Like, let's go back to the targeting cycle I mentioned a minute ago. The old Russian doctrine used to be that for every one target, you fired 100 shells to hit that target. The American doctrine was one shell, one target. So the Russians have modified that, and they've gotten better at it through Syria. It was down to the latest unclassified report I saw was around 40 shells per target. That's still a dramatic number of shells. We're talking about a logistics train after that. We're trying to import all these massive shells forward. We're talking about a huge logistics chain at the same time too. And those are trucks at that point that are not carrying food or ammunition or anything else, or oil. They're carrying large shells for long range artillery. And so that's just one example of how their logistics chain has just failed. So
but even how can they afford to do 40 shells per? 100 seems. How can you even have that many to go after one target?
That's a great question. It's the old Soviet mentality of we will build in numbers and use as many as we have for victory, at all costs. And that's kind of how they've shown they've gone forward. Even now, the retreat from Kyiv and the reinforcement of the Donbass has shown an old Soviet doctrine that the West had thought they had gotten rid of. It's the reinforced victory. Before, it was always, in the West, it's reinforce where you're losing to minimize losses, and then press a counterattack to move and maneuver. And the Russians have not changed their Soviet doctrine of keep pressing forward on all fronts, and if we lose in one area, reinforce wherever the victorious unit is. And that's what they're doing in the East right now. They found a couple openings, and they're trying to press that advantage as much as they can. And we're drawing back now because their units near Kyiv have just gotten decimated.
So I just want to get this straight, because I've never served in the U.S. Armed Forces and don't know military strategy as much. So the Soviet doctrine is to reinforce where you're losing. Can you explain that a little bit?
Soviet doctrine was always reinforce victory. So and the American and Western style has always been to reinforce where you're losing to maintain combat effectiveness. And then press a counterattack in other areas. So basically be able to have a sustained retreat but maintain that combat effectiveness. So you're not going down a 60 or 70% combat effective unit. Whereas in the Soviet doctrine, you weren't combat effective unless you're less than 20% of the unit, which is essentially just getting ground up. So imagine going with 1,000 soldiers and having 200 come back, or 200 still fighting and still being tasked to run forward as the machine guns. That's Soviet doctrine. So. That's dramatic. It's dramatic. It's just in our heads in the West, we never really kind of wrapped our heads around it all the way, and it's there. We just saw it happen on a much larger scale.
So, one of the defeats in Kiev that they talked a lot about was the Antonov Airport. Are you familiar with what happened there?
Yeah, Hostomel. Yeah, it goes by another name. The Antonov Airport is where they had the Antonov plant and where they had the giant Antonov airplane, which was the world's largest airplane.
And so what they're saying that Russians were trying to use that airfield tactically and take it over, and they weren't able to. Can you explain a little bit about because that seemed to be a pivotal kind of losing moment in Kiev for the Russians? Sure,
it happened right at the bat in the first 2 days of the war. In Hostomel Air Base, they were trying to use that airstrip, which is located about 10 kilometers from Kyiv, to basically create an air bridge. To fly in reinforcements in a hurry and push forward into Kiev immediately while the rest of the army was still catching up. But the Ukrainians, they didn't count for the strength of the Ukrainians, which was quick response and the internal lines of logistics, where they were able to resupply, put Stinger missiles up there, have their rapid reaction force immediately on Hostomel, and be able to shoot down. It was, at least from what we've seen in the papers here, at least one Russian transport landing aircraft, which was set to drop about 200 or 300 Russian soldiers off. and they shot down several of their helicopters and everything as well.
Oh.
The Russians eventually took that air base, but at the point of where it was no longer usable as that air bridge, and it kind of had defeated that purpose already, because it was no longer a lightning strike into Kyiv.
So it sounds like, and we all know from the rest of the news that the Ukrainian forces have been, where the Russian forces have been very ineffective and kind of sloppy, Ukrainian forces have been quite effective. And I remember you and I chatting over a beer, and you were talking about how effective. I can't remember. Was it the javelins or this?
The javelins, you bet. ATGMs and javelins, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about their kind of success rate with the javelins and why it's so cool?
Certainly, what's really interesting is the success rate so far. The javelins that we've seen in open source reporting has been off the charts. It's almost one hit, one kill with every single one of them. And what's interesting, it hasn't shown that it takes very much to stop a Russian column right now. And some of the videos that have been posted online, you can search for yourselves online. You've seen javelins hit Russian convoys, and the whole convoy stops and enables other flanking maneuvers and attacks to be able to hit that convoy and decimate the entire convoy, rather than the a more tactical maneuver, which would be to fan out and then put suppressive fire down, which is kind of the more Western doctrine of how to respond to an ambush. And it's just decimating the columns, and you've seen it left and right. Yeah, we don't know still how many javelins are left, how many went to country, and I don't think we'll ever get the full count. But it's not just javelins. There's ATGMs, there's AT4s, a whole host of Western anti-tank missiles that have come in, and they've really been shown. What's fascinating, I think I talked about this before, was how adept the Ukrainians were at using them. They figured out the choke points by themselves. They naturally knew that terrain so well because it was their backyard. This is their house. This is their neighborhood they're fighting for.
So this is the home game for them, essentially.
Yeah, they know where those curves in the road are tough to navigate. That they can naturally stop the Russians in those spots. And usually it takes 1 or 2 javelins to really stop a convoy, and then you can attack it from all sides after that. And it's shown repeatedly. You can look online and the YouTube videos now of all the videos of these convoys just getting absolutely decimated in that exact scenario we just talked about.
Now, have you ever worked with, or I'm sure you've been part of training the Ukrainians since the invasion of Crimea? Can you talk a little bit about how the U.S. has worked with training the Ukrainians that we're seeing pay off now?
Yeah, absolutely. So one is very open. It's the Joint Multinational Training Ground Ukraine. It was outside of Lviv, up in Yavoriv, and it was the site that actually the Russians just bombed a couple weeks ago. They hit the training site where the Americans used to be. But it was the Americans, Canadians, Brits, and a couple other NATO nations came together, and they started doing large-scale training of the brand new battalions that the Ukrainians were putting together. They started training them in Western doctrine. And this has started going, I think, since 2016 or 2017. And we had U.S. units going in, and we had about 300 or 400 soldiers going in every 6 or 7 months and rotating in and out to swap out, to be able to train brand new Ukrainian recruits and kind of teach them in Western style of thinking. And that Western style of thinking, which is very different from Soviet doctrine, is how to think for yourself, know what the end objective is, and figure out ways to get there.
Right. So let's just say that one more time. So how to think for yourself, how to know what the end objective is, and then how to know how to get there. Is that accurate?
Bingo. It's in U.S. Military, we call it principles of mission command. It's knowing what your ultimate objective is. So everyone down to the lowest soldier knows what the end objective is, and then everyone's given a task. But if things fall apart,
you still have individual agency. So you're saying in the Soviet doctrine, not everybody knows what's going on or has individual autonomy.
Right. It's not even the autonomy. It's the awareness. So in the Russian doctrine, you're told to run 200 meters and wait for further instruction. In the American doctrine, it's, hey, we need to capture that town. Here's how we're going to do it. But things fall apart. That's what we're going for, guys. So good luck. Go get it. And so it's enabled missions. So even at the lowest level, lowest sergeants and lowest privates can figure out how to further that objective and mission and still accomplish that.
Okay.
So it's empowering soldiers.
Right. Yeah. I interrupted you. Go. Please keep going.
No, I was just saying it's empowering soldiers to go forward rather than empowering, telling them they have to run the
saying like, wait, someone's dead. We haven't gotten our mission, so we don't know what to do. That's kind of like the alternative.
And we've seen that a couple of times in Ukraine as well, where units have gone, the Russian units have gone someplace, showed up, and just kind of sat around wondering, like, okay, now what do we do? Our commander who was telling us where to go he's dead behind us. So now we're here. We're just going to sit in this town for a while until they are told again to go someplace else.
So Daryl, can I just ask you from I know you've done strategic studies. studied strategic studies. That doesn't seem all that effective. Like, why are the Russians still using that? Do they just not want people to know, or like why are they still using that doctrine? Out of curiosity.
It comes down to the way of thinking. It comes down to control, where if you condense control in a very small number of people, you have accountability that way, and this way, you can't have people rise up against you. So it goes back in doctrine, back in communist doctrine on the Soviet side. You still see it in certain armies too, like in the PLA in China and others. So it's just the power of control, of
Wow.
not empowering. Yeah,
it's so interesting. I mean, just how closely it corresponds to communist ideology. Like you're saying that China, right? It's like no individual autonomy. Like we operate as a group, and yeah, totally disempowering because of the need for control is too strong. That maybe that's their weak spot, right?
It has shown to be so far.
Yeah.
Great.
So fascinating. So we talked about. So are you seeing? Are you seeing now watching this from Washington D.C.? Is it very obvious to you of seeing the effects of the training that we've been giving them for the past since 2013?
Great question. And the long and short answer of it is yes. So remember, the Americans and Canadians and Brits were all there until roughly the end of January, early February of this year. So they were there almost to the very beginning of the invasion. And this is not the same army in Ukraine that the Russians saw in 2014. The army has been transformed from the bottom up. The tactics and senior NCO corps that are there now are professional, and they know how to fight, and they know how to do maneuvers and move to contact in a much different way than they did in 2014. And so the fight that Putin was expecting did not happen, because the Ukrainian army that was there was not the same one he thought was going to be there.
What do you think are the differences? Because we also spent 20 years training the Afghan army. And then when the Taliban happened, the Afghans essentially ran away, the Afghan army. What do you think accounts for like the difference in, if you can, qualify this, of the Ukrainians kind of transforming in 5 years into a unbelievable fighting force, and the Afghan National Army, which we also spent arguably more time and money training, falling apart?
Sure, I think it's a great question. I think it comes down to a sense of pride in your sense of community, I guess, and in your nation itself. It's that national identity, and I think it's a lot of cultural differences too. In Ukraine, it's much more Western aligned and much more Western thinking, and that wasn't the case in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, there's still it's a very corrupt, very bribery heavy culture, and a lot of that stuff didn't maintain itself, and a lot of our values didn't transcend into the cultural norms in Afghanistan. And then that's the exact opposite of what's happening in Ukraine, where we're helping Ukraine defend themselves from a foreign invader, which is different than being the invader sometimes, as it's seen by the Taliban when we were there in Afghanistan.
So in terms of how we were seen as well, we were seen as in a much friendlier light within.
I think that's a big part to do with it. Yes.
Like they wanted us there to help them to combat Russia, whereas we weren't necessarily as desired in Afghanistan to help repel the Taliban.
I think that's a great summary of it. Yes.
Interesting. What about women? So, can you speak a little bit about, we've seen these sometimes a little bit hypersexualized pictures of really gorgeous Ukrainian women in fighting gear, but how are you hearing about women fighting in the army and also behind the scenes? What are you hearing about women?
That's another great question. You've been on point with some questions tonight. I appreciate that. Done your research. So the Ukrainian army has really gone forward in a tremendous way of accepting a lot of female fighters who are coming in and want to fight. There's been a lot of foreign partners who've come in that are female as well. They've been accepted in, but a lot more into the territorial defense force, where if you were a Ukrainian citizen and you wanted to fight and you wanted to pick up a rifle, they allowed you in many cases in the territorial defense force. And they were training forces there. They were training their forces there, and they were training special female battalions to go forward and try to defend. So I think it's very impressive. I still have a lot of friends in Ukraine. I've been to Kyiv quite often. My work took me over there, as well as Lviv, and kept in touch with quite a few of my friends and colleagues who are over there. And they're fully involved in the fight, even if they're not on the front lines. They're right behind, trying to do resupply and logistics, which is what the Russians are missing badly. Now you've got, it's incredibly organized, incredibly smart, incredibly effective, mostly female-led groups taking up the charge to bring the resupply forward and make sure the front line has everything they have, and it's worked. That's why the javelins are still firing.
Yeah, so when I was chatting with your friend Irina Lamarenko, she was telling me about how, at the beginning of the war, women were taking their beautiful Max Mara designer coats and cutting them up. And then, Irina and other people who knew how to sew were turning them into soles for the boots for Ukrainian soldiers.
It's incredible. It's so smart, and the dedication they put into it. Yeah, that's so neat. And they probably look great too.
I think it's some designer uniforms, let me tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
And even her, when I was chatting with her, she was telling me essentially about how, she reoriented all of her operations to figuring out how to outfit how to outfit Ukrainian troops for the first part of the war, and also donate, some of the proceeds from her sales of her very Ukrainian national identity clothing to the war effort.
Absolutely. And you talk about that national identity, that it's only grown and gotten stronger in the past several months, especially the camaraderie that grew when Irina and many others were living in the subway tunnels in Kyiv while their city was getting bombed. That's the kind of camaraderie you can't put a price tag on. You can't fully grasp and understand until you actually see it or hear about it. And then you realize that they've grown so closely together because this war has bonded them together on this. So
right.
that's a strong will to break.
I was listening to something, and they were talking about a historian about how, Russia for so long has been trying to say that Ukraine is this like illegitimate second-class state that came out of Russia, but it's like, Russia's baby brother who doesn't get straight A's. It's like Russia's like loser little brother. That's kind of how they seems like how they try to portray Ukraine, and that like they are Russia, right? That there's no difference. And so, someone was saying that the Ukrainians are as much trying to protect their sovereignty as they are their identity.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating, if to go back into history, the Kiev Rus was the birthplace of Russia, and that took place in Kiev. The Kiev Rus, the Russian people, the Russian culture started from Kiev. The famous battle cries, and the sinking of whatever, I forget what that battleship was down in Odessa. A lot of the famous parts of Russian culture are Ukrainian, and Ukrainian now takes it as their national identity and says, Russia can do what they want, but Ukraine is not Russia. This is separate. We're totally different. And the polls that has been very interesting, watching the polling change from when Ukraine became separate to where it was even in 2006 when some of the first revolution started, to 2014, and then today, how closely aligned they are to the EU. And I think that's what the Russians, that was their worst case scenario for Vladimir Putin, was what happens if Ukraine becomes part of the EU or they become super Western, and you've got this bright, sparkling jewel right next to, some of the poorest parts of Russia. What a dichotomy that would show to his constituents back home.
Yeah, I didn't know also that Khrushchev and Brezhnev were both Ukrainian.
And Stalin was Georgian. So,
I mean, it just seems wild now. What do you think about this whole Transnistria thing?
That's a hard question. And the reason why I think that's important, and Transnistria is more vital now than ever, is I actually called this back right when the war started. I said, Moldova, you're next. It's clear looking at that map, that land bridge has got to go from one Russian micro-state to the other, and it's going to go right through Odessa. And Transnistria has been that breakaway state where the Russian army has tried to maintain an outpost since the Soviet war, Soviet wall fell, the Soviet Union dissolved. And it's not a new secret that this was going to happen. And I think that it's kind of been foretelling and foreboding for a long time. And I actually said before, and I posted online before, I'm not sure if anyone saw it on Facebook, but I said Moldova might as well join the fight now and start now and join Ukraine. And if you really want to get in the fight, you could probably talk about Azerbaijan and Georgia and Norway and Sweden too. You might as well figure out and make up your mind now, because if not, Putin's going to make it up for you in a minute.
So you think that I think we're in agreement here that he's not going to take all of Ukraine, right? They lost majorly in Kiev, but that there's a strong or potential possibility of taking the east. But then even if he doesn't take the whole country, that he could just go towards Because Transnistria, it could be argued, is a kind of a friendly territory to Russia, is it not?
Yeah, it's a microstate that's friendly to Russia. It's a breakaway region of Moldova that's been a semi-quasi-independent area that's self-governing in Moldova now since 1991. But every time I tried to guess Putin's mind, I've been wrong. So hard to tell what he's going to do. But the one thing that the Russians will not stand for is outright failure. So Vladimir Putin is going to try to figure out a way to milk this into a victory in some way or another. And if that means he's got to throw more people at this problem, he will. He absolutely will. More resources, fine. You take as many tanks as you need, even if they don't work, if they don't shoot, even if they barely drive. Yeah, they'll do it, and he will send those people on without second thought. That's the Russian way of misery.
What's the Russian way of misery? What is preventing our special forces from just going in and killing Putin?
Having a conventional force or unconventional force, like special forces that are sanctioned in a mission from a nation state such as the United States, going in and targeting another sovereign power's leader is not only against the laws of war, but that would definitely start a national conflict and definitely put ourselves at risk as well. It's something you don't do, and there's a reason why. And
what about Saddam Hussein? What about Gaddafi? I mean,
also in those two cases, we didn't just go in and target it and kill them. We invaded the country, for example, in Iraq. We went after him, we hunted him down, and put him on trial, and then the Iraqis convicted him. In Libya, you could say that the Libyans self-prosecuted. They found him and killed him that way. But either way, it wasn't special forces going in and just shooting someone and doing it. That's not how we do this. And if we're going to go to war with someone, let's go to war. Let's do it. Let's put all eggs in one basket and say, hey, we're coming for you.
We're so polite. Putin just poisons people. Because it's like when we look back at Hitler, right? Every Hitler movie is like people trying to kill Hitler, and like everyone's like, why didn't someone just kill Hitler? And it's like we probably had the same thinking back then, right? That we can't do this, like we gotta leave him off. We're gonna win this war the right way, but like it's also like, why didn't somebody kill Hitler? Like he killed all my family.
Yeah. History is always written by the victors. It's a hard one to put in perspective, but it's something that the U.S. has never sanctioned or condoned, even though I'm sure we've wanted to in the past. I'm sure there's many countries out there wanted to do the same to us. So.
Yeah, I'm asking that not from an ignorant perspective, more from a desirable perspective. Anyway, what do you think about, Mariupol has just been beaten into the ground. And there's talks that, that in, whatever these peace deals are, which kind of seem like a lot of hogwash, that Putin's going to try to get Zelensky to cede Mariupol in peace talks. Do you think that the Ukrainians would ever agree to a peace deal that cedes Mariupol to Russia?
It's a hard one because it's hard to tell how the Ukrainians think they can get it back right now, and how long the Russians are willing to be there. Because the partisan warfare that's shown up, even in the cities they've got in the south, like Kherson, it's shown that the Ukrainians are fighting to the teeth at the end. And now you've got the conscripts coming, so there's forced conscription now of Ukrainian men into the army to fight against the Ukrainian army in the east and the south. It's hard to tell if the Ukrainians will ever settle for that, knowing that's happened. There's still thousands and thousands of people missing that have been deported from Ukraine and sent back into Russia. So we have no idea what happened to them. There's stories all over the internet and all over the news reports about people just going missing. Sons, fathers gone. So as long as those issues remain, I think it's hard to tell how this ends.
Right. What is your projection? I mean, what will it take? So let's, I think Mariupol is hard to say, but if we're looking at Donbass, right, and Luhansk and the eastern part, what will it take for Russians to win, the Ukrainians to win?
Well, I think we're talking about open, honest means of victory here. The Russians are going to try to take probably up the Dnipro River. So that's taking all of the east of Ukraine and probably most of the south, maybe even Odessa, although Odessa is fortified to the teeth right now. And we're looking at where the entrenchment lines, where the Ukrainians have fought desperately right now in the east. And they've held off the Russians, but now you look to the northern part of the country where you've got the Russian armies attacking down from the north to the south, and kind of creating this big bubble almost where a lot of the Ukrainian army is at risk of being enveloped. That could be tragic for the Ukrainian army, where you've got 40,000 troops over there potentially at risk of being enveloped and eliminated. So we'll find out in the next 3 weeks if the Ukrainian army can hold them off, if our logistics can get out there, our reinforcements, our howitzers, our counterfire radars, our more Javelin missiles, more tanks can get that far to help reinforce them and blunt that Russian offensive, because the Russians are throwing everything they've got at them. I think the last report I saw there was 75 battalions involved in that fight in the east, which it's a lot of soldiers. Can imagine a lot of tanks. I think it's probably close to about 110,000, just based on my quick math here. Troops, bearing down on the Ukrainians over there. So
compared to what are we thinking in terms of numbers? If you could bring
the latest estimate I saw was about 40,000 Ukrainians over there defending.
So this is like David and Goliath kind of situation.
Yeah, so it'd be a question of whether or not some of the Polish tanks and the Romanian artillery and the German anti-aircraft guns can get there in time to make a difference to help stop and blunt that. It's almost the Battle of Bulge happening again. So. We'll see how that salient holds.
I do have to give a shout out to Australia, because one of our first guests to report on the ground from Ukraine has now become the Ukrainian ambassador to Australia.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. So he's been over there negotiating like Australian tanks also coming over to help in the fight, which is pretty cool that he went from, talking to us on the show from a basement near Kiev with like bombing nearby to being the ambassador. Just pretty cool. Wild guy. Can you explain what encirclement is? You refer to it later on, but I'm still a little bit unclear. Can you explain for our audience what encirclement means?
Yeah, encirclement essentially being surrounded on all sides. So it's not just fighting the enemy coming at you at right head on. It's about having the enemy flank you on both sides and then coming in from behind you as well. And that's dangerous for many reasons. Anytime you have an enemy on your flank, you've got crossing fires, which can be really hard to defend against. And if you're doing it on two sides, it's even worse. And if you've got to do it on all four sides, you're in deep trouble. From a tactical standpoint, that is incredibly dangerous and one way to risk losing your entire army. And that's something the Russians have, in doctrine, have always tried to do the pincer movement, which is essentially taking two claws and kind of going in from both flanks. And they've shown they're trying to do that again. This is old Soviet doctrine. This is something the U.S. and the West has studied for a very long time. It's interesting seeing the meetings yesterday and over the weekend with Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken over in Europe, talking and coordinating with our European allies, talking to them about how can we get, logistics and everything forward to the warfighters on the ground in Ukraine. And there's just so much to do. But everyone in that room has been studying Russian warfare for 50 years, 60 years. So this isn't anything new for anyone in the room. And what's interesting is I think we may have overestimated some of the Russian capabilities significantly, and looking at it now. So if it makes you feel sleep better at night, you can definitely feel better about knowing that the U.S. Army is definitely prepared very well and trained to the teeth for this.
So we talked about humanitarian aid with Ryland and how there's a disconnect between the aid sitting at the borders. How are we getting javelins and all this stuff to the Eastern Front?
So I can't speak to some of that because of some classification levels, but
whatever you're able to tell us.
Yeah, it's there are still routes that are open that are being used and coordinated between NATO countries in the West and the Ukraine government. And what's interesting, you saw Russia trying to target railroad infrastructure in Ukraine recently, and several railroad depots and junctures. And I think that might have an impact on some of that. But as long as they can still get trucks and planes and trains in there, the West will figure out a way to arm Ukraine. They will get those weapons in there. It might take a little longer.
So you think that, there's been, since the war started, there's been, Zelensky coming on and asking for this, and the U.S. saying, no, we can't give you that, but we'll give you this. Do you think that the U.S. is doing enough in terms of what we are supplying Ukraine in terms of, anti-aircraft missiles, anti-tank missiles, planes? Like, are we giving them enough of what they need, or like what else could we be providing them that we're not, that would tactically be extremely helpful?
That's a very good question. I think so far recently, I think the administration has come a long way in approving and allowing a lot more of the weapons that Ukraine has been requesting. I wish it would have been done, 5 weeks ago, but the Ukrainians can use it now more just as they did before. One of the big ones I saw that was in the most recent package was the counter-fire radars. Those radars, which can identify where artillery shells are coming from on the Russian side, are incredibly important, and so that we can the Ukrainians can target exactly where they are and shoot right back and hit their artillery, which has been so powerful. So at the beginning of the war, I think Ukraine lost a couple of their counter-fire radars they had, and so replacing those, which were the same counter-fire radars the U.S. Army uses, is incredibly important.
So it seems like almost like, and then this leads to my next question, which is intelligence of like these reports now that seem to be these bombshells that the CIA is helping Zelensky and that, we're giving US intelligence. Why is this such a big deal? I mean, don't we always share intelligence with allied countries?
We do, but we don't have an intel sharing agreement with Ukraine, or at least not one that was up to NATO standard. And the reason why is that before, I believe there was a concern over intelligence leaking in Ukraine because there was still a lot of Russian infiltration inside Ukraine. There's an open source reporting here recently that I was talking about how the U.S. intelligence had worked to help Ukraine weed out a lot of Russian spies that were there. There's still always a concern that anytime you share intelligence, you may lose the ability to have that source in the future because the adversary may figure out how you collect that information and then cut it off. So, if we're looking at a certain satellite image on a certain satellite day, they might start covering certain things at certain times. We can't see it, as an example. So that was a big one. But in that same article, they talked about how we helped keep the Air Force in Ukraine alive by helping let them know when the Russians were going to be targeting certain airfields and certain planes in certain areas, so that the Ukrainians would move it right before the Russians would strike. So they'd be in a field someplace, and then the next thing you know, the Russians are blowing up an empty field, and Ukraine kept all its planes.
That's really amazing. I mean, do you think there's anything so wrong with that we are giving them intelligence without an official intel sharing agreement that could be kind of overblown?
I don't think so. I think they figured all that out now for the most part, and I think that has probably been worked out quite a bit. But there's still always that concern that once we start doing that, we start losing the ability to collect on that kind of stuff in the future. Which, if the U.S. has to go to war with Russia in the future and defend NATO, they could cost American lives in the future too. But at what risk? Do you risk having Ukraine lose the fight now, so we can potentially have things in the future? I think it's a hard sell.
All right, Daryl. Well, I want to let you go because I know you got a baby in the background and also have kept you for a long time. This is fascinating. Is there anything else that you think, I have not asked that you think it's important for a Western audience to know?
Yeah, I think one last point I'd like to make is that I know there's been a lot of point made, especially President Zelensky and has mentioned nuclear missiles quite a bit and the nuclear threat that Vladimir Putin has put out there. And Putin himself has said that, hey, we're going to put all our forces on alert just in case. We don't want the West to respond. If you look at the Gerasimov document, it's a document that's well written about all over the internet. It kind of lays out their strategies for a hybrid conflict or a war, kind of just like this is. And if you follow that, this is exactly in their playbook. Everything that has happened in Ukraine is in that playbook at some point.
What is it called again? Can you just say it a little clearer?
Yeah, it's the Gerasimov document.
Gerasimov, okay.
Yeah, it goes back to their one of their old chief of defense who's still there, but I think it's kind of been marginalized. He wrote basically a doctrine about how to do a hybrid conflict, how to start it out and start putting little green men in and start a political upheaval, and then have a supporting mission with clearly identifiable objectives, be able to go in, and then having the country come in later and do a full scale war, and then you actually escalate with nuclear weapons to de-escalate the conflict. So part of that is you escalate, saying we're going to use nuclear weapons if you don't stand down.
But it's just, you're saying it's just the threat, not that we're actually going to use them.
Well, the strategy is the threat.
Okay.
The problem in lies is no one knows where that threat stops. If you don't take the threat seriously, do they use it? That was never in doctrine to figure out how far that goes. So I don't think that
you think that Russia would actually, hyperbolically press the nuclear button.
I don't think that threat is real. I think that the Russian command and Russian leadership still knows that mutually assured destruction button is still fully on, and no one wants to hit that button. So.
Okay. Daryl, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a delight, getting to just chat intellectually with you like this. with lots of books around us. And I'm sure people could sit and listen to you for hours. I hope you'll come on and be a guest again. And I really want to
thank you.
Thank you so much for your expert commentary, for your service to the United States, and for your time.
Thank you very much, Samantha. It's a pleasure being on, and thanks again. Look forward to catching up again soon. Thank you.
Okay, sounds great. Take care, Daryl.
All right, thanks. Bye.
So that was Daryl Owens, who is the head of government relations for a very complicated military associate, the Director of Government Affairs for America's Warrior Partnership. He is also a U.S. Army Reserve officer and served with the U.S. Army within Europe specifically. So that's why I wanted him on the show. He knows this stuff in and out. And I think it was really interesting hearing about how so much of the Russian strategy was really straight out of the Soviet playbook, as if, we've been served this for 50, 60, 70 years since the end of World War II and since the creation of the Soviet Union. Not the creation, since about 1950 and the Cold War. So, it's really interesting just seeing that they're kind of playing out these ineffective military tactics that are really not working, because that's just how they've been trained and that's how they function. And because the locus of control and that need for control, which really does come from the top. If you look at Russia and you look at the fact that Putin has this incredible need for control, and that the people that have control within Russian society are very, very, very small sliver of the population, which is Putin and the oligarchs, the super, super rich and, very, very high in military. Those are the people that control all of Russian society. So it's really not surprising that that holds true with Russian military doctrine as well. So what a great show. Amazing guests. You've also heard about a lot of places that you can donate to help. You can even volunteer and go over and drive people from the border of Ukraine to Krakow. If you like to drive, great opportunity for you, and hear some unbelievable stories along the way, and help make sure that women and girls specifically are free from the risk and the threat of human and sexual trafficking. So those websites are project.apollo, make sure I have this right, projectapollo.org.uk for Project Apollo. And then our generous sponsor, which is the Ukraine NGO Coordination Network, which is trying to coordinate all of these small and very nimble NGOs that are getting resources, getting humanitarian aid, protecting people on the ground. So please consider donating to them. www.uncn.one to support this critical mission. We've seen how big and cumbersome these huge charities can be, and these small local organizations. You can hear with Ryland, even the Baptist Church, saying these are the people that need to go, and setting people up in their new homes. So please consider donating to these local NGOs. It's incredibly, incredibly important. Lastly, if you liked this episode, we really appreciate your support. Like it on Facebook, like it on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, please take the time to give us a 5-star review, because that's how the algorithm then recommends for other people to listen to it. And feel free to share it on your social media platforms. If you think what we said was important, please, please, please share it, and consider supporting us on Patreon. Our lowest subscription is less than the price of a Starbucks coffee. It is $3 a month. So for the price of a fancy Washington, D.C. or New York City cocktail, you literally can be a subscriber for 5 or 6 months to Samantha Politics, and it really, really, really does help us with our production costs. I also want to give a shout out to our other sponsor on this show, Stream Inspectors. Whenever I say, hey, Zach, can you put up that picture? Zach works really, really, really long and hard on this show to make me look good, to make the guest looks good, because he really genuinely cares about highlighting these important global issues and bringing awareness to you. He does not get paid the thousands of dollars that he normally gets paid. But if you are looking for people in live stream production to help you produce something that is not a really terrible, grainy Zoom webinar that nobody wants to watch, contact Stream Inspectors for all of your live production needs. And lastly, this is also sponsored by my company, Empower Global. We do diversity and inclusion training for global companies, specifically lately, a lot of training around inclusive leadership and cross-cultural communication. So working with big global companies to help them understand, how do you communicate between a Russian and a US and a Ukrainian and somebody from the UK? And what are the differences in communication style that you need to be aware of in order to create productive teams? So as more and more and more people go remote, this need is ever more apparent, and there's really not that many firms that offer it. So if you're interested in that, visit www.empowerglobal.net. I teach something I absolutely love called the Women's Leadership Challenge, which brings together groups of 8 to 10 women from around the world who want to be the leaders of the future. These are incredible women, and I teach them how to step into their power, start where they stand, and change the world. So if you're interested in that, you can visit www.womensleadershipchallenge.com and apply. We still have 2 spots left in our DC cohort. Our virtual cohort now is currently full, but we have a few spots left in our July virtual cohort as well. So you don't need to be in DC. Finally, next week, we're going to be doing our show on the French elections with a great professor from GW. So talking about the implications of the Macron win. However, of the very high percentage of voters, the most ever that Marine Le Pen has got, and what does that mean for the future of France, for the future of the EU. So make sure you tune in next week at Wednesday. Next week it's going to be at 6 o'clock p.m. because we have another new baby. So 6 p.m. next Wednesday for that episode on the French elections. That's it for tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and good night.